before me.
Deploy! Deploy!
Norman Fowler, for the sake of the Tory party, is it now John Major's task to get you all out of the mess that Nigel Lawson got you into?
Well, I think obviously everyone will be watching the budget, but I think it's wrong simply to regard this just as a one-off thing. The budget comes in a series of budgets which has reduced taxation. I think that what the party will want, what the public will want, is very much the same. They'll want reassurance, they'll want to see a budget which brings inflation down, they'll want a steady budget, but with some nuggets in there, hopefully, of innovatory things.
Did I understand you to be saying that there'll be one statesman-like budget from John Major and then one crudely political one?
No, you didn't understand me to say that. What I would say is how John will approach this will be to put forward a budget which is broadly in the interests of the public. I don't think he's going to remotely kind of go for a short-term gain of a by-election or even the next few months. I think that that would be wrong, would be bad by any measure, and I don't think he will even be tempted to do that.
But what about the Beverley factor? What about those councillors who resigned the Tory whip up there? How much bad news and for how long can the Tory party take?
Well, you talk about the Beverley factor. The extraordinary thing is really that given the pummeling that we've been taking, that there haven't been more examples of that. I think
you expect more?
No, I don't actually. I think the significant part of it has been that there hasn't been that reaction. And in fact,
think this is the Tory party at its calmest?
I think the Tory party is much calmer than you give it credit for. I mean, the Conservative Party that I know in Birmingham, that I know in the West Midlands, is much, much calmer than you give it credit for. And obviously, at any stage, whenever you have a crisis, you're having a few people who will temporarily jump overboard, but they'll come back. And who knows, John may be able to do something as far as community charge itself is concerned. If he does, then I think that the councillors who have resigned the whip are going to be put in a rather awkward position about whether they're going to come back on board or not.
Gordon Brown, may I ask you, you're now presenting yourselves as the alternative government and behaving as if you think the prospects for that are good, but isn't the worrying thing from the Labour Party's point of view that as the election's almost certain to be fought on the bread and butter issue of the economy, that Labour still doesn't seem to be trusted as the competent party of economic management?
I think that's changed quite considerably, and people do trust us, and they're looking at our policies very closely and finding what they want. What we are calling for today is a budget that's fair, obviously, a budget that deals with the problems that have not been dealt with, childcare and the environment, but most of all, a budget for the long term, a budget to bring stability, and that's why we're encouraging the Chancellor to look at entry into the EMS, a budget for the long-term investment in industry, because we've got to look at the problems that we've got when output is falling, production is falling, and investment is falling. And people ask themselves why it is, after 10.5 years, he's got to report today that we've got the highest interest rates, the worst inflation, the lowest investment, the biggest trade gap of all our competitor countries.
Labour continually stresses investment and training, Gordon Brown. If Labour were elected, you say that you would finance the things that you want to do through public expenditure by growth, but isn't the reality that you will still be the high tax party and seen as such?
Not at all, not at all. And what John Smith is proposing is a banded system, which is far fairer than the present system of simply two rates. We're talking about investment because the country needs investment. We've underinvested in training, as I think Norman Fowler would be the first to admit as a former unemployment secretary. We've underinvested in research and development, and we've underinvested generally in our industries. So we look to 1992 with investment falling, and no other country in Europe is in that position. We've got to invest, otherwise we're not going to make it in the markets of the 1990s.
Roy Jenkins, Lord Jenkins, as a former Chancellor, do you think that the Chancellor now is in just the same position, or a very similar one, to the one that you were in 1968?
Well, it's perfectly true that no Chancellor's ever very keen on what he's inherited from his predecessor, and even though my predecessor turned out to be a Prime Minister in the future, I wasn't all that keen on the inheritance of late 1967. And certainly John Major is in the position that Nigel Lawson's stewardship is looking pretty tawdry at the moment. The only thing that's looking quite good is the way in which he resigned. But everything he did before resigning is not looking very good, and surprisingly short time afterwards. How about what do you do in present circumstances? It's a classic case of the old Irish story, which is the way to Ballylickey. If I wanted to get Ballylickey, I wouldn't start from here. However, one does always have to start from here, and starting from here, what I think one wants to try and achieve is inflation down. We've all agreed about that, but without this excessive reliance on interest rates, so there's no real prospect of a fall, and maybe indeed with what's happening in Japan and elsewhere, a real danger of further quite intolerable increases. Now, in order to do that, you've got to face up to some difficulties. We don't know what the Chancellor's going to say. So far as the Labour Party is concerned, I think I agreed with all the detailed points that Gordon Brown made. But I don't think the Labour Party, although it makes responsible noises, I don't think it bites on the bullet of responsibility. It doesn't face up to the hard things, which is that if you want to have an effective anti-inflation strategy without an excessive dependence on interest rates, you have to do two things. You have to stop shivering on the brink, and you have to get into the exchange rate mechanism of the European monetary system, and you have to have a somewhat tighter fiscal stance. In other words, you have to be prepared to put taxes up somewhat.
Lord Jenkins, Gordon Brown, Norman Fowler, thank you all very much indeed. David.